Welcome. This is Jim, host of the Faith Influencer podcast, where we're going to dive into discussions on faith's role in everyday life, from navigating blended families to overcoming challenges. I'm a husband, a father, a Bible teacher, an advocate for applying faith to everyday life. So tune in as I share personal stories, valuable insights, and practical wisdom. This is Jim Cunningham. Welcome back to Faith Influencer. I want to talk about something today that is real life and live right now because I'm walking through this with some people. Plus, it was one of the biggest surprises in my life when I went through a divorce, and maybe one of the biggest surprises you're getting ready to go through if you're in that position. I know some of you are because you reached out to me and told me you're right there in that position, going through a divorce or having just gone through a divorce. And so here was the big surprise that I didn't realize was going to happen. When I went through a divorce, out of the divorce, on the other side of the divorce, I didn't realize that invisibly I was carrying something on my back. I would have denied it. I didn't know I was carrying this backpack that was packed with all of these issues and all of these things that I'm getting ready to go through with you. I didn't know they were all there. I didn't necessarily feel it consciously until I sat down with Lanny, which you've heard me say many times, a counselor, and we began to unpack that backpack. It was one of the biggest steps that I made in my own personal journey in healing, and it'll be one of the biggest steps you make in your journey into healing is to begin to unpack that backpack. So here's what I want to do with you today. I want to talk about the necessity of processing what's in that backpack. I want to help you identify some of the things in that backpack that you do not know that's there, because remember, this is all about having a healthy blended family. If you're just going through a divorce, someday you'll probably remarry again according to statistics. And are you going to have a successful blended family? Well, you can if you begin to unpack that backpack. Now, here's one of the truths about unpacking it before I begin to identify it, is that you have to unpack one thing at a time. Now, I'm going to identify them, but realize you can't unpack all of this at once. As much as you want to just turn the backpack over and empty them and be rid of all of these issues and hurts and hangups, you can't. You have to do it one at a time, but I'm going to walk you through it today. So that's where we're headed, and I hope you understand that this is about healing, and someone rightly said, healing begins where honesty begins. So the first thing you have to do is be honest that you do have this backpack on your back that's packed with all of these issues, having gone through a difficult relationship and gone through a divorce, and especially if you have children involved. So we're going to unpack it, be honest that it's there, and let's begin by just using some common sense about this. Now, years ago when I pastored for 20 years, you can't imagine how many funerals I did. Well, I'm not trying to relate marriage to funerals, though sometimes they do relate. But of all the funerals that I did, one of the things I would do when I would sit down with the grieving spouse was, here's one of the first rules. When you're hurt, you don't make big decisions. That's such a mistake that people make. In this case, they'd want to, should I sell my house? You shouldn't do anything, is my response. Should I make some big financial decision? I want to go buy something. I want to go sell something. No, you don't do anything when you're going through hurt. Same way with a divorce. When you're going through a divorce or having just been through a divorce, you've got to fight the urge to do something big or drastic in your life, because, like it or not, when we're hurt, when we're grieving, and you may not even know, I'm going to reveal it today, but you may not even know you're going through this, you're tempted to go make a big decision. Or the worst temptation you have, having just gone through a divorce, is to enter into another relationship. That's a huge decision that you're not ready for. So all of that being said, let's jump in and begin to unpack this backpack. So this is a process of getting rid of these issues, but you may not even know what they are. I want to say this. When I realized that I had this backpack that was full of these, what I'm getting ready to talk to you about, I saw them as failures. Now that was one of the mistakes that I made as I began to unpack it, is that I wanted to hide them because I saw all of it as failures. They're not signs of failures. So let's just clarify that. They're not signs of failures. They're human realities that are a part of your life because of what you've been through. So don't see them as failures. Now, we can divide these up into categories. We're not going to get through all the categories as much as I would like today, but it would make this podcast way too long. We're going to talk about, for sure, the first, and we'll see how far we get. The first category of the things that you're going to find in your backpack, the most common ones, would fall under the category of emotional or identity related. Emotional or identity related. Now, here we go. Let me just number them, and some of them we're going to talk about. The first thing that's in your backpack that you're going to have to deal with is grief. Someone said a long time ago, I don't know who said it, but I've copied it and said it many times, that going through a divorce is like going through a death. It's like having a funeral. It's like this person that you've been married to now is gone. They're no longer there. You don't wake up to them anymore. They're not in the house anymore. They're gone. It is a time of grief. Even if you didn't get along, even if you fought all the time, even if they were unfaithful, for the most part, for most people, you're going to go through a period of grief. It's just like losing a spouse in life. Think about this. You had plans. You connected your identity together. You envisioned this future together. You may even talked about retirement and those things. You want to travel and all of that. It's a time of grief. I used to say, when I was sharing my testimony with people about going through this, I used to say that maybe the most difficult thing for me, and this falls under grief, was I experienced the death of a dream. I had a dream of ministry, a dream of my family and my children all raised in this way, and my future and all of this. And when I went through a divorce, it was the death of a dream, and that created all of this grief in me. And again, I didn't know I was experiencing this grief, but I was. I had a man step in my office the other day, and he was sharing with me what he was going through, and then he just started crying. I mean, he just started weeping, and I just listened, and he was experiencing grief. He's going through a divorce. And so I asked him, what are you feeling? What's going on? Where's this coming from? And his grief is that he was already envisioning what this was going to do to his children. He was grieving over his children. So lots of reasons we have grief stuck in our backpack, but we're going to have to pull that grief out. It's like a rock weighing you down in your backpack. You're going to have to pull that grief out. You're going to have to be honest about it, and you're going to have to deal with it. And it's bringing it to surface. When I was growing up as a kid and you'd get a splinter in your finger, my mother would get this white piece of tape. I don't know what kind of tape it is. You can still get it because I have some. And she would put that tape over my finger where that splinter was in my finger. And that tape over a couple of days would pull that splinter to the surface. It would draw it out so then that you could get it out of your finger. Well, that's what I'm talking about. With grief, you got to identify it. You got to bring it to the surface and begin to deal with it. That's one. Here's the next one. You've got guilt in your backpack. Here's the second thing. Shame. Oh, man. I can't tell you how much I dealt with shame, but you're going to deal with shame. It's going to embarrass you just on a personal level. It's going to embarrass you that your friends know that you're going through a divorce. How many of you tell me something about it in the comments. How many of you feel shame because you're going through a divorce? If you take the shame because of how your friends might look at you or your family might look at you because you're going through a divorce, I'm going to say multiply that by 100 for the shame that I felt. You know why? Because I was a pastor. This is not supposed to happen to the pastor. The pastor is not supposed to go through this, and I was going through it. So I was feeling the shame. One of the ways that God has used me in the meantime, since then, that was a long time ago, by the way, but one of the ways that God has used me is that I speak at men's groups. And so we have large gatherings of men who all of us are just Dudes who are broken. That's what we always say to each other. We're a bunch of dudes who are broken. Well, we're all broken in this world, by the way. So all of us guys get together, and the first time they asked me to share my testimony, I knew what they were asking me. They're asking me to talk to them about the things I'd been through as a pastor and going through a divorce and all of that. It was probably one of the most difficult things I ever did in my life. I did not want to do it. I didn't want to share it. I didn't want to talk about it. I did I didn't want to go through that process, one, because it made it alive again and it brought it up to the surface again because it's just right there. You know how quickly you can feel the emotions of all that again. I didn't want to share that. You know why? Because I felt shame. Even after all those years, I felt the shame of having gone through that. And I did feel like a failure for having gone through it. Double it because I was a pastor. So shame is a big thing. You gotta deal with the shame or you're gonna be hiding. Okay? You're gonna be hiding. I didn't want to see anybody. I've told you this before. After I went through divorce, I resigned my church. When I resigned my church, I didn't want to go to church for a while. I wanted to sit on the couch on Sunday mornings and watch football and hide from everybody because I felt so much shame. Shame is a heavy, heavy weight. Do you know what I'm talking about? How many of you are feeling the shame of having gone through this? And I even felt the shame with my parents because I knew that it would hurt my parents. So in every realm, I felt shame. Well, I didn't know some of the ways I was reacting was because I was feeling the shame. But when you feel shame, you're going to try to push everybody away and get in your corner and hide. You can't do that. You have to deal with shame. So, do you have that big, heavy rock of shame in your backpack? Probably you do. It's time to take it out. Here's the next thing: loneliness. Loneliness is in that backpack somewhere. It wasn't for me as big of a rock as shame and grief, but loneliness is one of them. And what is loneliness? In this case, loneliness is the loss of companionship. You know how we get in such a routine with our spouse and our household and the way you do things and it's comfortable? And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But when you go through a divorce, all of a sudden you don't know what to do with yourself. I see people now who are like, well, I'm going to go out every evening. I'm going to get the girls and we're going to go out on, or guys, we're going to go to the bar or whatever. You feel like you've got to go do something because you've had a loss of companionship. Well, the biggest mistake I said in the beginning is that you start looking for companionship. Listen, when when you go through a breakup, when you go through a divorce, you need stable people you can lean on. That's the kind of companionship you need. You don't need romantic companionship. Run from that, or you're going to make some stupid mistakes that you're going to regret. You don't need that kind of companionship. Let me tell you the other kind of companionship you don't need. You don't need these negative people in your life who went through it several years ago and they're still bitter and angry because they never unpacked their backpack. You don't need to be around those people. They're just going to drag you down. Do you know some people are in your life only for a season, and that season is over and it's time for them to be gone? If you have this little rowboat and you got your friends in your rowboat and you've got some negative people, it's time to kick them out of the boat. Because when you're going through this, you're going to experience loneliness. And if you're hanging out with the wrong people, going to drag you down, you need some strong, stable people in your life who are going to give you good advice and be there for you. Companionship. Here's the next one: loss of identity. That's something else. I experienced this in a couple of ways, but a lot of people experience the loss of identity because think about this. You're married to your spouse and you have your friend group. You're probably going to lose that friend group. You're going to lose at least some of that friend group when you go through a divorce. And when you lose the friend group, you begin to experience a loss of identity because what you used to do and who you used to hang out with, they're not always going to look at you, especially in a good way, especially if part of your friend group, I'll give you an example. When I went through a divorce, my ex-wife, some of our friend group came from her. They were friends with her before. And they became friends of our family and our family with their family. But because they were her friend, some of them, when we went through a divorce, I was out. I was Even though we were good friends for years, I was out because they were her friend. I experienced the loss of that. You're going to experience the loss of that. Maybe you already had. At the time, I said, using my Oklahoma colloquium, I said, I don't give a rat's rear. That's how I would say it then. But I guess deep down inside, I did give a little bit of it because I experienced the loneliness. Here's what some people say, and it's, well, I started to say especially ladies, but men do it too. Who am I now without the marriage? That's what some are saying. Maybe not verbally, but they're saying it inside. Who am I now without the marriage? Why do you say that? Because you gave your whole life to the marriage. You gave your whole life to that. I'm talking about you connected your identities. You gave your dreams and your future, and then you raising a family and sharing kids, all that. You gave your whole life to that marriage. And now that marriage is over. And especially for those of you who didn't want the marriage to be over, you're asking the question, who am I now without the marriage? You're experiencing this loss of identity. Well, I can't heal that for you. I can't just make that better, but I will tell you that if you identify that in the backpack and just say, pull that out and say, you know what, I'm experiencing this loss of identity because everything I had was tied to my marriage. Every friend was tied to my marriage. Every place we went was tied to our marriage. Our church was tied to our marriage. Now my friends are gone. I feel like I need to change churches now. I feel like I need to go find a whole new group of friends. And your identity. That's a big thing, your loss of identity. So I want you to name it, pull it out of the backpack, look at it, identify it, be honest about it. Then the next thing is fear of being alone forever. Now, men don't experience this as much for long, and I'll tell you why. Because statistically, men marry quick after a divorce. Women don't marry as quick after a divorce. Ladies can go years single, but men don't. A man is going to marry so quick. I was visiting the other day, and the lady said to me that her grandfather had gone. No, it was a death. Had gone through the death of his spouse, and they'd been married all of these years, and within 2 months he was remarried. Now she's talking to me after the remarriage had taken place 2 years later, and they're getting a divorce. Why? Because he did something stupid. He entered a relationship, married someone that quick. Men do that. Men marry way too quick after a divorce. Is it because they are afraid they're alone? I don't know. But there is that fear that you're going to go through of being alone. Don't want to spend any more time there. Here's the next one, anger and resentment. That's in everybody's backpack when we're going through this, anger and resentment. So just know that it's there. Here's what you got to be careful about is that in your anger and resentment, you're going to lash out at someone. You're going to lash out at your kids. They're going to think, Mom's in such a bad mood. Dad is always angry. Anger and resentment in your backpack is going to affect other people. You got to pull that rock out and deal with it. Here's another one. How about broken trust or a sense of betrayal? That's one. How about this one? How about depression? How about someone described it as an emotional numbness? You just feel numb. You don't have any emotions anymore. You're just numb. You can't smile. You can't laugh. You have one face that's stuck and you're numb. A sense of numbness is what some people go through. It's like you're never going to be happy again. That's a real deal. You will be, and you will smile later, but there's a sense of numbness. Here's another one, confusion and life direction. What happens to a lady when she gets a divorce and now financially she's on her own? I say lady because men tend to deal better with this. Men tend to already be in a position where they're bringing in income, so it's not as much of an issue. But what happens to women who go through a divorce and they're not used to bringing in income? That's a shock. Now you're responsible to start making money. There's a confusion there of direction. What are you going to do? you're going to be saying things like this. Here's what one lady said that years ago, and I'll never forget it. She said, I started to go to college, and I'm not promoting that. I'm just telling you what she said. I started to go to college and fell in love and got married, and we created our household, and we had our family, and he had a good job, and I took care of the kids, and I stayed at home, and I loved it. And then he cheated, and we got a divorce, and I never did anything to be able to find myself in a job and be able to make money and to be presentable in that world. I gave up all of that. Now I don't know what direction I go. She said, if I had to do it over again, I'd have gone to college. I would have gotten a degree. I would have done all of that. Well, I'm going to tell you that may not have helped the situation at all. But I understand what her pain is. Her pain is that I don't know which way to go. Am I going to have to, as an adult woman with kids, am I going to have to move back in with my parents? Am I going to have to lean on them for money? So there's this loss of direction. So you get what I'm saying. As a matter of fact, I want to give you one other, just almost the opposite. I want to give you one other. There's many more, but this is the last one I want to give you. Some people react, and especially women going through this divorce, this is going to be a tendency. You're going to have to fight it. That's why I wanted to mention this one so you'll notify it, is that you might become hyper independent. Hyper independent. By that, I mean, you're going to have this subconscious feeling that I can never rely on anyone else again. I will never rely on anyone else again. I understand but why you say that. It's coming from hurt. That's why I said you can't make decisions while you're hurting like this. Because you know what happens? I work in the area of blended families. I've had some podcasts where we've talked about this. You know what happens? Then you get remarried. And here's what you say to your new spouse. You say, well, I'm going to have my own account and you can have your own account. And you know what you tend to do if you never deal with what I'm talking about, this hyper independence? You're basically going to say, yeah, I want to marry, but at the same time, I don't want to come together. I want to marry, but I want my own identity. You keep your own identity. I have my money. You keep your money. We'll just live in the same household, quote, married, but inwardly, I'm never going to rely on you. I'm going to always be independent. What's going to happen to that marriage? That's no way. That's the ground for a marriage. So that's the opposite, that hyper independence. You have to fight that too. So many more things we could say. I knew we'd run out of time talking about that. Underneath all of that, I'm going to move on and say a couple other things as we wrap this up. Underneath all of that, I'm going to say, there's a deep need for these things. There's a deep need for healing. You need healing. God will give you grace. God will give you mercy. God will give you strength. He will make you whole again. There's a deep need for healing. And do you know, after divorce, it's not over. God will make you whole again. After divorce, it's not over. God, in his timing, will bring someone else in your life again. After it's over, God is not finished with you. After divorce, God will still use you. After divorce, you can still have an impact in this world. After divorce, you can still have direction in your life. After divorce, you can be happy again. After divorce, you can be fulfilled again. After divorce, you can have those dreams again. After divorce, you can be right where you want to be, where you thought you'd always be. After divorce, that's waiting on you. It's not over. You just have to go through healing. You just have to go through healing. You can have reassurance again. You can have that identity you feel like you lost again. You can have community with friends again. You can experience God's grace through others again. You can have a vision again in your life. You can have a purpose again restored in your life. I know because I've walked through all of that. So let's unpack the backpack. Let's be honest about these things. Let's seek emotional, spiritual healing. Let's take the steps in this direction. And there are people out there who are qualified to walk this journey with you. I'm anxious to hear your response and what you have to say. As always, thank you for joining our podcast. This is Jim Cunningham. Talk to you next time.